A gallery layout is essentially a map of an exhibition space with all of the objects or paintings that we're going to display in that space laid out carefully and accurately. We need a plan to work to, otherwise when we come to install an exhibition we're not going to know where things need to go, and obviously that's not a good thing when you have paintings waiting to be installed into an exhibition gallery. We start with a computer model. You can do it either with paper and card models, or you can use computer models, which are becoming more and more useful for us now. It means we can be very, very, very accurate to within a millimetre. So we start with the measurements of our gallery space, including everything down to the skirting boards and mouldings in a room, to the height of the gallery, lighting rigs, and the heights of doors and things like that. The pitfalls of getting dimensions slightly out are, if you can imagine a 20-metre long wall, if we get the slightest thing wrong on a measurement, so say something is measured and it's 5 or 6 centimetres out, when you go along the wall installing paintings, you could end up having to put a painting right into a corner. So we need to know in advance that everything is going to fit exactly where it needs to be, which, because obviously it can cause you a lot of problems as you get down the line a little bit further. When it comes down to actually thinking about how the space will be curated or positioned in the gallery, it really does pay to go and visit as many other exhibitions as possible, so you have an idea of what other people are doing, and it could be as simple as using a certain colour on a wall, or using a certain height of a false wall, or a certain type of case can be designed, which can really benefit what you're doing, and it does kind of broaden your horizons a little bit. And obviously you've got kind of years of knowledge laid up of what you've been doing previously, but it always helps to go and kind of refresh what your knowledge is. Before we start these layouts, we need to consider a number of things. The main one for us really is accessibility, and it's how we move people around a space. For a lot of visitors, they need to have a sit down as they're walking around these huge gallery spaces, so we need to make sure that there is enough room to start with, that we can put benches or sofas or whatever the gallery happens to have at the time, and enough room around those items so other people can get around comfortably. If we're putting plinths in, or if we're putting cases in, or false walls, we need to make sure there's enough room, for example, for people to move around in wheelchairs or with push chairs. So that's one of the main things we need to consider. We can't have pinch points, so if you're having an exhibition where there's a lot of visitors, you don't want them all to be in one place at any one time. We also need to consider things like the budget and how much money we have to spend on physical things in the gallery. So most museums and galleries already have a big stock of things like cases or false walls, but occasionally you need to go the extra mile and build some more. When we're putting these exhibitions together, we tend to create exhibition teams, so specific people from different departments that need to have input into an exhibition, into the process of an exhibition. Before you do the layout, you will need to speak to the curator of the exhibition. They will be providing you with a list of paintings or objects that will be going into your exhibition. They will also give you an idea of the narrative of that exhibition, so it might be that certain objects and paintings will need to sit alongside other ones or go in a certain order, which is obviously a very important thing to know when you're coming to lay out an exhibition on a plan. So they're probably the primary people you need to speak to. You'll also need to speak to people like the graphic designer, so you have an idea of what they're going to put into an exhibition, so that it could be physical graphic panels, it could be vinyl graphics on a wall, it could be projections, it could be videos with information on, so they need to be factored in. And also I'd guess you need to speak to a technician or a carpenter, or the person that does your technical work in the gallery space. Some things we need to consider for when we're installing objects could be as simple as particular paintings being delicate to light, or needing a certain lighting level, and it could be that in certain gallery spaces you're able to do that more easily than other spaces. If we have too many paintings for a space, the ways we can tend to get around these things is to hang certain paintings closer together. We maybe even kind of double hang, or depending on the size, maybe even triple hang a painting. So you'd have one above another one. So three in a row, and you could even squash the distances vertically between them to give to make it feel like there's less paintings in the show than there actually are. If you see what I mean. We also need to think about, because it's very easy to forget that alongside all these paintings you need to have some information that goes with it, some kind of interpretation, as we tend to call it. So that could be anything from graphic panels or vinyl stuck directly onto a wall. So we need to bear that in mind when we're laying out, but also kind of labels that go with each painting as well. And sometimes these can be quite large. So when we're planning this out in advance, we need to allow for these things to be next to the paintings as well, because otherwise, if you forget about these things, it could be that you're hanging your paintings so close together you can't fit any information next to it, and obviously that's going to be very, very confusing for visitors. When it comes to installing an exhibition, we tend to print out a plan of where things will be going and try to label it as clearly as possible, because on the whole, your exhibition designer, whether it's yourself or someone else that you're working with, will not tend to be in the gallery space when you're installing. So it really helps if your plan is as accurately marked as possible. It could be a really simple kind of A, B, C and D if you've got a few pieces of work. If you've got hundreds of paintings in an exhibition, you need to be really, really clear about what you're doing. What I would tend to do is give the plan to the person who's going to be in charge of installing the exhibition and run it through with them in advance, and if possible help out wherever I can. And we would literally measure each painting space and the space in between each painting onto a wall with masking tape or something like that, so you know in advance where things are going, and that will kind of give you enough play, so if something turns up and it's not quite the size that you were expecting it to be, you've got that kind of flexibility in a space. But it does pay to be very, very clear with the people that you're working with where things are going. Obviously there are going to be times when you need to be changing things around and moving things because it doesn't quite tie up with what you've got planned on your computer model or your cardboard model, whatever you've been using, because obviously there's a big difference between the actual painting being in a gallery and a reproduction on the computer. It doesn't always work in the same way as you expect it to. So you need to be very, very willing to change things around if need be. In terms of valuation, we tend to have kind of these things called wash-up meetings afterwards, where we'll get the team that have been working on an exhibition together, and we'll go through things like the visitor comments book that most places will have, things like comments on our website, comments in the media. Sometimes we do get positive reviews, which did happen recently. Actually, we got a review in our local paper in Plymouth, and they did actually comment in the paper about how good the layout was, which is something which most people take for granted. So when that happens, we take that on board, and we obviously appreciate that kind of feedback to us. It could be that people that work in the galleries from day to day notice there are problems. Say there is a particular wall sticking out too far into a gallery space and people are bumping their knees into it, or children are walking into it, which does tend to happen quite often. And we sit down and we think about how we can improve these plans in the future and make sure they're as easy for people to navigate as possible. My top tip for people that are new to exhibition design, my top tips would be accurate. There's nothing you can do which will improve your display more than just to be accurate. But you can make sure you get the correct measurements, as close to being correct as possible. Measure your gallery twice or three times. Measure the spaces. Measure the access to your gallery twice, 2 or 3 times, just so you make sure that you know exactly how big the space is that you have to install in. And obviously, given what you're going to be putting in your space, if it's your items, if it's your paintings, make sure you measure them properly. If they're not yours, you've got to hope for the best and hope that what you are going to be putting in the space is what you expect it to be. The worst thing that could possibly happen is that you start installing work and then you end up in the corner of a room with no space to put a painting up, and you have to kind of rejig your entire layout on the day, which is the last thing you want to be doing really.